Welcome back. Now, before the break, I was riding KTM's Super Duke R, a mad, naked bike that is known as the Beast. Actually, before the break, I also had a fellow new presenter making his debut, but he seems to have got a bit tired and it's all overcome him, the emotion, the whole thing. So he's gone for a bit of a lie down. Anyway, back to the bike. What do you do if you want something very similar, but just with a little bit more added comfort and practicality? The answer to that question is this. It's the GT version of the Super Duke R. It's the same sort of bike, but for people with a brain. Or rather for the sort of person who doesn't take his brain out when he goes riding. The more well-rounded person who might look at this backdrop and think, that looks fascinating and full of history, I'd like to learn more, rather than the sort of person who looks at this space and thinks, wow, what a great place for a burnout, I'd love to listen to the V-twin bouncing off the walls. This is Berchtesgaden, a picturesque town in the Bavarian Alps, a small part of Germany that is almost completely surrounded by Austria. It is also famous for the rather unfortunate reason that the Nazis loved this place, including that freaky psycho Hitler bloke who had himself a holiday spot on a mountain overlooking the town that was known as the Eagle's Nest. Thankfully, the only Austrian beasts wandering these parts nowadays are 1290 KTMs. It's the naked bike we saw before the break that has been christened the Beast, but there's still plenty of that DNA inside this sport touring GT. Big V-twin with loads of horsepower, chrome moly tubular frame including a strengthened subframe for bigger loads, WP forks upside down but semi-active this time, single side swing arm of course, and hidden away all the black boxes for the electronics, which means that this is a sport tourer that even has a track mode. There's undoubtedly plenty in here that will satisfy the sport rider, but what about the touring part of the equation? Well, obviously there's the panniers, which are smart, very easy to use and possibly a touch on the small side. There's an adjustable screen too, which means you can get yourself nicely out of the wind. Heated grips and seats on this model packed with all the extras from KTM's Power Parts catalogue, and cruise control and the ability to switch between different ride modes or damping presets for the suspension, all while on the move of course. You'll be able to glide along in perfect harmony with your better half, ogling all the lovely sights, convincing her that you are in fact a perfect, friendly, deeply caring sort of eco-tourist kind of guy, and she will love you for it. But what about when your better half is spending your money on a spa treatment at the hotel and you've nipped out to do a bit of touring the old-fashioned way? Will the bike still be fun down a twisty road? Oh yes. Oh yes indeed. This road has got more twists and turns than a Dan Brown novel, and still the GT has not lost the plot. And I think a lot of that is down to the way the semi-active suspension reads the road. Adjusting the suspension to account for the fact that all your luggage and the handbrake is back at the hotel is simply a matter of pushing some buttons. The same goes for other variables like throttle response and traction control sensitivity. What I particularly like is the ability to mix and match these settings. So at the moment I've got track level of throttle response. I've dialed down the traction control so it doesn't interfere too much. I've turned the anti-wheelie off, and I've combined all these sport settings with the comfort level of damping because it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a bumpy road.
I love doing this without ever having to get off the bike or even stopping. So that means I never have to embarrass myself trying to set up the suspension and wondering whether I should be using a screwdriver or a spanner or a hammer.
I've ridden BMW's updated S1000XR recently, and that was very good. And although it might not feel quite as punchy and in your face as this, it did feel a lot more smooth and refined, especially at normal touring speeds. But it had a silly bucket seat, so the KTM at least has a comfort advantage in that respect.
Well, maybe, but only just. The seating position is good for sport riding, but I'm not convinced for touring. Even the power sports seat is a bit too hard. The foot pegs, well, they're slightly too high and slightly too far back, so it pitches you forward a bit, and that puts too much weight on your wrists, because also the handlebars a little bit too low. So for me, for long distance touring, I prefer the riding position of BMW's S1000XR. But when you get to the mountains, well, then I prefer this riding position.
This is a seriously capable sport tourer, of that there is no doubt. But is it any better than BMW's XR or Ducati's Multistrada? Perhaps in some areas, but all three of these bikes are stupendously good. And if that sounds too much like fence sitting, then here's a bit of clarification. I'd just take the Super Duke R actually. I'd throw in some soft luggage for the touring, maybe a little bit of screen for wind protection, and once you want to stop looking at all the lovely scenery and just travel through it really quickly, then the R is just way more fun. And it's cheaper and better looking. I mean, who needs a brain anyway? A Super Duke R in the garage is worth a brain on a GT or something. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed both of those tests. Fantastic bikes, the pair of them, and absolutely wonderful location to ride. So if you are lucky enough that you ever end up in the Berchtesgaden area, Bavaria, Austria, really try and make the effort, put some money aside, hire a bike or something, because really the views, even if you don't ride a bike actually, you could just come walking and seeing the sights, because absolutely tremendous area. The KTMs, as I said, both amazing, really. That's all there is to say to it. The naked bike in particular, obviously Don will be very chuffed, because I think just by an edge now, especially for the road, I do prefer the KTM Super Duke, simply because a big massive V-twin with all that well of readily available torque is such a pleasure to ride on the road. Are there any negatives, are there any downsides to the KTM path? Well, in terms of the road, yes, in a way. If you think about other naked bikes like the R, even if we talk about the GT, if you talk about its competitors, whether they be the Multistrada or the XR in particular, BMW's version, 4 cylinders, they can be ridden very easily, very smoothly, and this applies to the S1000R, the naked bike, at low RPM. So if you happen to find yourself chugging through a village, which you do here in Europe a lot, I mean, speed limits are 50 k's an hour through villages. Outside of the villages can be 60 or 70 k's an hour before it opens up a little bit. So you do find yourself doing these low speeds, and inevitably you find yourself in a higher gear. So in something like 6th gear on the KTM, it's not even usable until you're hitting about 80 k's an hour. So you're not chugging through at really low RPM like you can do on the 4-cylinder bikes. It's all shuddery and jumping around and will stall on you. It's all a bit mechanical and agricultural. But, you know, wow, so you have to change gear at those sort of RPM. Talking of which, we have said in the past that KTM's quick shifter is perhaps a little bit better than BMW's. I'm not convinced anymore. All these systems are utterly superb, fantastically smooth when you're at high RPM, in the top third of the rev range. In the middle, they're bearable. At low RPM, I just completely ignore them, because it's much easier to do it the old-fashioned way, blip the throttle, use the clutch. And the nice thing is the electronics don't get confused. It's very easy just take over and do it yourself. So they're all pretty much of a muchness, actually. The electronics, I think I have to mention, although they're brilliant in terms of the fact that you can tailor them to, you know, to whatever mood you're in, you can mix and match all the different elements. The KTMs still give me a little bit of cause for concern about longevity, because I did on both bikes get quite a few and quite often warning lights, general failure, this, that, ABS flashing. Nothing ever went wrong, and a quick reset, it all disappeared, but the messages did keep popping up, and it, you know, I only give the bike back after a few days, so it doesn't bother me so much. I just carry on, but it would worry you as an owner. Stuff was flashing at me, and that didn't feel right. It certainly didn't ever happen on the BMW. Although, having said that, the BMW did call a load of fire engines and policemen and ambulances when I wasn't looking, so, you know, swings and roundabouts. Last thing, news-wise, instead of me waffling, watch this.
So today we're having some fun. We're converting the Indian FTR 750 into a hill climb motorcycle.
We're here at S&S Cycle doing a one-off custom exhaust on the hill climb bike.
Could you make this more of a 90 and bring it out forward more?
The Indian engine has a very strong wide power curve, so I think it will compete for the win.
To be here building a hill climb bike, testing it for the first time is pretty monumentous. We haven't built a factory hill climb bike since 1939, so we've partnered with experts, we've partnered with the Kester family, multi-grand national champions.
To have Indian come on board just shows that what we've been doing really pays off, and I'm pretty proud of that, and I know the team is as well.
The opportunity for John to ride for Indian is just awesome. I think it's a big step for Indian to get back into it.
Everything we do, we do it to win, so we want to go attack the hill, we want to win.
Big up to Indian Motorcycles then. I gotta love the attitude of that American manufacturer. Listen, you've failed your audition. You went for a sleep halfway through the show. That isn't gonna work. And you want paying, don't you? You still want paying. There you go. Unbelievable. Okay, Indian Motorcycles, well worth a look. Keep an eye on them. Great attitude, like I was saying. Unlike yours, it's not a great attitude. You'll probably go back to sleep now, won't you? We'll see you again next week when the presenter won't be Spock. It'll be Donovan, of which I'm sure you'll be very glad indeed. We'll see you then.